Hello everyone, and welcome to our second video on La Rioja, where today we are going to go a little bit more into detail about what are some of the things that make La Rioja great, and what are some of the things that La Rioja can do in order to improve their winemaking techniques that could help them to reach a broader audience and also gain some more critical acclaim. So to start off, let's talk about what is great about La Rioja. We are going to be talking both about the wines themselves, but also some of the business side and the marketing side of the wine world. And that's where we're going to start with La Rioja. The first thing that is great about La Rioja is that they have absolutely dominated the market, both nationally and internationally, in terms of Spanish wine. They sell more wine than anybody by a long shot. And most other wineries and most other wine regions in Spain should be very grateful to La Rioja, because La Rioja is the region that paved the way for other regions to be able to enter into international markets, and they opened the door for people to be interested and willing to try Spanish wines. If it wasn't for La Rioja, Spanish wine would have much less consideration in international markets, and much fewer people would be aware of Spanish wines if it wasn't for this region that is king not only within Spain but the rest of the world. The second great thing about the region is the terroir and the Tempranillo grape. La Rioja is very lucky to be located where it is, where the climate, the soil, and everything about the region is perfect for growing very high quality grapes, and in this case Tempranillo grapes, which are originally from the region. And that avoids La Rioja from having to buy and plant grape varieties from other parts of the world, like many other regions have to do. The most widely used grapes in wine across the world are Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, which are originally from France. Great grapes for making wine. However, La Rioja has its own grape, which is Tempranillo. And this allows the region to make wines that are very unique, very characteristic of the region, and very different from other wines that are produced around the world. Actually, La Rioja is very much against the widely used grapes in the rest of the world. They don't allow people to make wine using either Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon, because they want to make sure that wines from La Rioja have their own unique characteristics and are very differentiated from any wines on the market. And the third great thing about the region is that when the wines are great, they are often historically great. Taking, for example, the white wine of Viña Todoña, which is widely considered by many wine critics to be the best white wine there is in the world. Obviously, all these things are up for debate, but there are many that consider it, which means it's a white wine of extremely high quality. And we can also take, for example, this year, Híjar and Las Beatas, which is two red wines coming out of the region, which have been given 100 points by many, many famous wine critics, including James Suckling this year, demonstrating that the region is capable of producing wines that are among the best in the world. There are, however, some aspects of the region that I consider that need to be improved and need to be changed in order for La Rioja to stay with the times and maybe not get left behind in an ever-changing, ever-evolving wine world. And these improvements are: number one, relax the rules around how the wine has to be produced. La Rioja has some very strict rules around how the wine has to be produced. We talked in the first video about the different aging styles of wine: Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. In order to be able to label your wine as one of those, you have to follow very strict rules as far as how the wine can be aged. And many of these rules, I think, need to be relaxed or modified or adapted in order for many wineries to be able to make the best wine possible. Let's take the example of Artadi. Artadi was one of the most prestigious wineries in La Rioja. Artadi still exists, and they still make some of the best wines in the world. However, they are no longer associated with La Rioja. They left the region in 2015. and they released a press release in which they stated, "At Artadi, we believe that it is essential to offer consumers the opportunity to discover the diversity of our land, which gives wines value, differentiating character and authenticity. Consequently to the above, and without renouncing our origin, Artadi has made the decision to leave the Regulatory Council of the DOCA Rioja." Basically what they're saying here is, we want to be able to make the best wines possible that express our land and the grapes that we grow. In order to be able to do that, we feel that we need to leave La Rioja so that we can make wines the way that we feel come out the best. The second thing we feel that they could improve is that there is too much label confusion currently on Rioja wine bottles and too much focus on the wrong things. Traditionally, Rioja bottles had very minimal information on the labels. You would be able to see if it was a wine from La Rioja, you would know which winery produced the wine as well as the name of the wine and the aging process that was used to make it. So you would see Rioja, the bodegas may be called Muga, and Crianza, and that's all the information you would get. The region it's from, the winery that produced it, and how long that wine had been aged. You wouldn't get any other information. They currently have added a list of new categories and new information that can be put on the wine label, which you can see here. All of this information is still secondary to the three big wine aging labels, Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. The problem is that many wineries and most of the great wines produced in La Rioja actually do not want to follow these strict aging process rules with wine. So the problem with that is that many of the best wines in La Rioja choose not even to state for how long the wine has been aged. They believe that there has to be a lot more flexibility according to the harvest and the state of the grapes year by year on how long that wine can be aged, and even if it should be aged in an oak barrel for a certain amount of time or even use other recipients to age the wine. They want to be able to play a lot more with different techniques and different styles just to make the best wine possible, not to make a wine that follows a very strict set of rules that's going to produce a very predetermined result. For those who are familiar with La Rioja, there are a lot of great Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva wines, but they all share very similar characteristics and flavor profiles. So many great wine producers want to be able to open that up and produce wines of different styles, of different flavors. And in order to be able to do that, they just, ignore the wine aging techniques. They don't want to label it a Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva because most of them are not producing wines following those techniques. So two clear examples of this are the bottles that we mentioned at the beginning of the video, Ijar and Las Beatas. If you see on the labels, there is absolutely no mention of Crianza, Reserva, or Gran Reserva. However, in the case of Ijar, there is a lot of information about where the grapes are grown, the town that the grapes were grown in, the land surrounding the wine. That is what they feel is important. But then to make Ijar wine, they don't even use oak barrels. They age the wine in foods, which are much larger. They are made of oak, but the amount of oak flavor that it imparts on the wine is very different. It's much more subtle. And they don't specify how long it's aged for. And so it's very possible that the 2017 vintage of Ijar has been aged for a different amount of time than the 2018, because they decide how long it's going to be aged depending on how the grapes came out that year, the amount of sugar in the grapes, the intensity of the flavor, and all these other different characteristics. So I believe that the path for La Rioja in the future is to focus less and less on whether a wine is a Crianza, a Reserva, or a Gran Reserva, and a lot more focus on where the wine is from, the land that it's grown in, whether it's a single vineyard wine, and allowing winemakers to express the wine that they want to produce with more flexibility and more freedom. I also believe that, in the next 100 years, the majority of wines from La Rioja will still be produced in the Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva fashion. That is what most consumers are used to. That is what they look for when they're looking to buy Rioja wine. So that side of things is not going to disappear. But if they allow for more flexibility, La Rioja is also going to produce a lot more wines that can reach 100-point scores, even though that's very difficult, and historically there are very few wines that reach that level. But La Rioja is able to produce them, and the more of those wines that they produce, the broader the critical acclaim for La Rioja will be. So that's it for part 2 of this video. Stay tuned for part 3, where we are going to be recommending some very specific wines from La Rioja. In part 3 of this video, we are not going to be talking about some of the more famous, more expensive La Rioja wines. I consider those to be very widely known already. Most people who love wine will know, the great wines from the region. So the focus is going to be a little bit more on helping to discover wines that are lesser known, some Rioja wines that are made in different styles. Not necessarily Crianza Reserva or Gran Reserva wines maybe that are a bit younger, that are made using different techniques, and that will allow people to discover or, taste some wines from La Rioja that are made a bit differently, that taste a bit different, but that are great in their own way.